When most people think of the polar regions, the Arctic and Antarctica, they usually imagine lots of snow and ice, penguins, and polar bears. It can seem like a world apart. But in reality, what happens in the polar regions is very connected to all life on Earth. So let's take a closer look at these two extreme ends of the planet that are dominated by ice. The poles have very different geography and climates from each other. The Arctic is an ice-covered ocean surrounded by land. Antarctica is ice-covered land surrounded by ocean. Antarctica gets so little rainfall that it's classified as a desert and is much colder than the Arctic. Both poles have huge amounts of ice. The Arctic mostly has sea ice, which grows and shrinks depending on the season. Antarctica also has sea ice, but most of its ice is found on land in the form of vast glaciers and thick ice sheets. In both locations, ice is crucial to the ecosystem. From the tiniest shrimp-like krill to the largest whales, all polar animals are sensitive to changes in temperature and sea ice coverage. Life is different at each of the poles. Most of the life in the Antarctic is in the ocean. Penguins, whales, seals. Don't look for a polar bear here. In contrast, the Arctic has a more complex food web with land and sea organisms that interact with each other, including bears, whales, birds, fish, caribou, and more. Here is where you'll find polar bears, but you won't see any penguins at the North Pole. The poles are experiencing the effects of climate change at an accelerating rate, effects that we can see. Sea ice is decreasing, and with it, krill that depend on that ice for their survival. This is changing the entire food web. In Antarctica, warmer ocean temperatures are melting ice shelves, glaciers, and ice sheets. As this land-based ice melts, sea level is rising around the globe. In fact, ice melt in Antarctica is now thought to be the largest contributor to sea level rise. Since over 80% of the world's population lives near the coast, this is a global problem. The poles also play a key role in the global circulation of ocean water and air masses that keep the Earth temperate. Melting glacier ice adds fresh water to the oceans, which changes circulation patterns. And as ice melts in the polar regions, the oceans and atmosphere warm even faster. Humans are part of the polar system. Not only are we causing climate change, but we are also affected by it. Currently, there are more than 4 million Arctic residents, and they are witnessing the effects of climate change firsthand. Declining sea ice, rising sea levels, and changes in food webs are changing the way of life for indigenous people who have lived in the Arctic for over 40,000 years. We have a crucial role to play in protecting the poles and mitigating the impacts of climate change. New technologies are changing the way scientists study the polar regions. With satellites and an army of robotic instruments, buoys, gliders, and autonomous vehicles, scientists can study the poles year-round, amassing measurements over decades for ice extent and thickness, rain and snowfall, animal populations, and more. All this data allows scientists to better understand how the poles are connected to the rest of our planet, how exactly the polar regions are changing, and how these changes may impact us. This empowers all of us to make decisions and take actions to preserve our poles and the planet.